القاسم محمد وعلى بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة دائمة الباقي إلى أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد, sisters and brothers in Iman, Assalamu alaikum. To continue with our fourth session on the study of Nahjul Balagha for this series that we started after the month of Ramadan. Tonight we have khutbah number 210, which was in the email which was sent to you last night. And we'll be looking at it especially to understand the reality of hadiths, because many people, are interested, rightfully so, in studying hadiths, but you have to realize that you have to understand how this system of hadith works. And so the purpose is not really to go into what is known as ilm hadith, the science of hadith, but just to look at this khutbah of Amirul Momineen, to understand that it's not that easy just to go to the hadith, whether in Arabic or its English translation. There are prerequisites and there are conditions to understand the statement of Rasulullah, just as it's important to have the understanding about the ayat of Quran. Now, as far as this khutbah is concerned, it's an important khutbah from Nahjul Balagha, but as I have said many times, Sayyid Rizvi did not compile this book as a book of hadith, and therefore he doesn't give the sanad. He just compiled this from the literary point of view, whatever he considered to be an example, outstanding example of eloquence and clarity, fasahat and balagha. He included that in Nahjul Balagha, and therefore he doesn't give the sanad. But on this, as far as this khutbah is concerned, you will be able to see the fuller version of this khutbah with complete isnad, the chain of narratives, from the same person who has asked this question to Imam Ali. And this is in Usul Kafi of Sheikh Khulaini, who was before Sayyid Rizvi. So this is a pre-Nahjul Balagha source. Of course, the original source of this khutbah is in the book of Sulaim bin Qais al-Hilali, who is the narrator here. And but we are just going more through the text which is there in Usul Kafi. So what I'll be doing is combining, taking what is there in Nahjul Balagha and also trying to bring some of the additions which Sayyid Rizvi had just omitted there to get a fuller picture. Let me begin with this, the question that Sulaim bin Qais al-Hilali asked Amirul Momineen, where he says that, I have heard from a great Sahaba like Salman Farsi, Miqdad, Abu Dharr al-Ghafari. I've heard some tafsir of Quran from them and some hadiths of the Prophet. And then I also have heard a hadith from other companions. And I see there is a difference in what Abu Zar and Salman and Miqdad are saying and what the other Sahaba is saying. And then it says, then I have come to you, and I have heard from you same things which confirms what Salman and Miqdad and Abu Zar had said. And not only that, he goes on to say that, I've heard many hadiths from people, many sources, many tafsir of interpretation of the Quran from the Sahaba. When I have come to you asking about the same hadith or ayat, you have rejected their opinion. And so the question is, so do you think that the people can knowingly attribute false statements to the Prophet and interpret the Quran with their own, whim? Basically it should be with their own whims here. And this is where Amirul Momineen responds to it, and this khutbah in Nahjul Balagha is basically a response to that question by Sulaim bin Hilal what's his name, Sulaim bin Hilal, Qais al-Hilali. And basically, Amirul Momineen says that, there is a difference in the narrators. Now, he's not looking at this from ilm hadith point of view, where the hadiths are categorized as sahih and za'if and muwassaq, and there are so many different categories there. He is actually just talking about the narrations from the perspective of the narrators, and he's looking at the narrators and then classifying them into 4 parts. In the beginning he says that certainly whatever ahadiths are current among the people, there is a mixture of what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is false. Some ahadiths are repealing and others are repealed, which means some are nasikh and mansukh. Maybe the Prophet said something before, and then he basically cancelled the first order, and so the first one will be mansukh and the second will become nasikh. There are some hadiths which are am, some are khas. In some hadiths where the Prophet talks about issues in general, sometimes he talks about a very specific situation. So you have to put all this together. And he says the ahadith of the Prophet, just like the ayat of Quran, also has muhkam and mutashabih. There are ahadiths which are categorical, and then there are ahadiths which are of allegorical and symbolic sense. And so, people are of different kinds. Some of them have really preserved the entire words of Rasulullah. Some of them have just taken the gist of his words, put it in their own words. And that is where you have difference among what people quote from the Prophet. Not only that, he goes on to say that, responding to Sulaim bin Qais, that yes, people attributed false statements to the Prophet knowingly. And that's before even it comes to the category. The preamble of that khutbah is about the issue of fabrication in hadith, whether this was possible or not, and if it was possible, was it done knowingly or it was done unknowingly. And Amirul Momineen says no, it was done by some people even knowingly. It's not that it's out of ignorance. And he basically says that even during the Prophet's day, false sayings have been attributed to him, to the extent that the Prophet himself one day went on the khutbah, on the minbar, and gave a khutbah saying, Ayyuhan nas, qad kuthirat alayya al-kabbaba. The liars have increased when they talk about me. And then he says the famous words of the hadith, فَمَنْ كَذَّبَ عَلَيَّ مُتَعَمِّدًا فَلَيَتَبَوَّأْ مَقْعَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ. Whoever attributes a false statement towards me, fabricates a statement and says this is what Rasulullah has said, this person is actually, making his own seat in Jahannam. And this is something which the Prophet himself said in his own lifetime, which means the fabrication of hadith was even taking place when the Prophet was alive. Now, this is a very famous hadith, which is there in the Shia books, Sunni books, even in Sahih Bukhari. Nobody can deny that. There was a very interesting discussion between Sayyid Murtaza. Sayyid Murtaza is brother of Sayyid Rizvi, who compiled Nahjul Balagha. And Sayyid Murtaza was more a theologian. So he had a discussion with some of the Sunni ulama, and he was talking about this issue of fabricated ahadith. Especially he was saying those ahadith which praise the Sahaba, these are all concocted, made up ahadith during the time of Muawiyah and Banu Umayyah. And so they challenged him. How can you say that the Sahaba would even fabricate a statement and attribute it to the Prophet falsely? And so the argument he used was very interesting. He says, there is a hadith which says, and the same hadith he quoted, where the Prophet says that there will be many, many liars, and whoever attributes a false statement towards me, he is basically making his seat in Jahannam. And he says, you have only two choices. Either you say this hadith is it true, then you affirm what I'm saying. And if you say this is a fabricated one, again you affirm what I'm saying. So you really don't have a choice. Either you say this is true or this is not true. If you say true, then what I'm saying is true. If you say this is false, then this becomes an example of a fabricated hadith by itself. So there is no denial of this reality. No Muslim scholar, Shia or Sunni or any from any branch would ever deny that there were people who were making up a hadith even during the days of the Prophet. And so in that light, Amirul Momineen says that basically there are four kinds of situations that you have to be, you should know, especially the narrators. فَإِنَّمَا أَتَاكَ بِالْحَدِيثِ أَرْبَعَ رِجَالٍ لَيْسَ لَهُمْ خَامِسٌ. As far as narrators are concerned, there are four kinds of people who basically narrate hadith, especially what I've done, I look at the commentary of Sayyid Hashim Bahrani, one of the past scholars who's done a commentary of Nahjul Balagha, and the way he has put it together, I made a chart of it. And basically he's saying a narrator is either a munafiq or a non-munafiq. If he's a munafiq, then either he was able to surmise or he was able to memorize fully. Those who were able to memorize fully are two categories. There were some who knew the full story about that theme and some others who didn't know. And those are the four kinds of people that Amirul Momineen is talking in his khutbah. So let us go to the first one, which is the munafiq, the hypocrite. When it comes to the munafiq, basically, this is very obvious. We don't have to go into details there. But Amirul Momineen says, رَجُلٌ مُنَافِقٌ مُظْهِرٌ لِلْإِيمَانِ وَمُتَصَنِّعٌ بِالْإِسْلَامِ. What is the definition of a munafiq? Somebody who basically expresses iman and faith. And مُتَصَنِّعٌ بِالْإِسْلَامِ, tasannu, even in Urdu we say the word tasannu, means he basically shows himself as he's basically a pretender Muslim. He's not a true Muslim. But, lives like Muslims, does things which Muslims are required to do. But the biggest problem of him, then Ali says, وَلَا يَتَعَثَّمْ وَلَا يَتَحَرَّجْ أَنْ يُكْبَبَ عَلَى رَسُولِ اللَّهِ مُتَعَمِّدًا. Even though he is expressing iman and he lives like a Muslim, the biggest problem is he doesn't refrain from knowingly attributing a false statement to Rasulullah. And that is the biggest sin. If you remember, even in the list of the things which are forbidden in the state of fasting, besides the 9 items which are related to our body, one item which is exceptional, doesn't fit in any category of bodily desires, is the issue of attributing a statement falsely to Allah and Rasul and the Imams. That makes the fasting batil. So it's a very serious issue. It's a major sin. And this is what Amirul Momineen is saying. A munafiq expresses iman, behaves like a Muslim, but when it comes to attributing false statements to Rasulullah, he doesn't shy away from it at all. And then what happens? People don't know him that he's a munafiq. If people knew somebody as a munafiq, of course they will reject him and his statements. But they don't know. They just know that لَكِنَّهُمْ قَالُوا صَاحِبُ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ. He's a Sahabi. رَآهُ وَسَمِعَ مِنْهُ. He has seen the Prophet. He has heard from the Prophet. وَلَقِفَ عَنْهُ. Basically he was there. He acquired things from the Prophet. فَيَأْخُذُونَ بِقَوْلِهِ. Therefore, even though he's a munafiq, they don't know he's a munafiq. They still, accept statements that he is quoting from, allegedly quoting from the Prophet. And this is where Amirul Momineen says that even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has warned the Muslims about the munafiqeen. Look at Surah Munafiqun. There you will see Allah says, even to the Prophet, that they actually pretend in such a good way that even when you look at them, you think they are really very pious people. And then that's nifaq. They have something inside, but they portray something else. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Munafiqun has talked about it. In the version of this khutbah in Usul Kafi, actually in that version, Ali quotes that ayat from Surah Munafiqun about the hypocrites. In the version of Nahjul Balagha, it's not there. And then what happens? He says that, they have continued after the Prophet. It's not that only this was happening when the Prophet was alive. No, they have continued even after the demise of the Prophet. Not only that, they gained positions with the leaders of misguidance and the du'at ila-nar, and those who call people towards Jahannam through falsehood and slanders. Not only that, the rulers basically put them in high positions and made them officers over the people. And through them, they amassed wealth, from the people. And then Ali says, you will see that normally the common man is a very common man. إِنَّمَا النَّاسَ مَعَ الْمُلُوكِ وَالدُّنْيَا. People really, only few who are really very men of principle. The majority common people are basically مَعَ الْمُلُوكِ وَالدُّنْيا. They go with the whoever is in power and with the desire of this dunya. إِلَّا مَنْ عَصَمَ اللَّهِ, except the one who is really protected by Allah's grace. فَهَذَا أَحَدُ الْأَرْبَعَ. So this munafiq who fabricates the hadiths is the first of the four kind of narrators that Amirul Momineen is mentioning in this khutbah. Let me, before even we continue with this, just few examples of why fabrication took place. What was the motivations of people would fabricate hadiths and say, Qala Rasulullah, although they know this is not true. There were basically three reasons. Number one, political gain. There were people who had their own political interest. And the prime example for us would be Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan. And therefore you will see that this whole issue of fabricating hadiths really was organized and reached to the peak during the days of Muawiyah and Banu Umayyah. There is no doubt about it. Even if you look at the commentary of al-Balagha by a Sunni scholar, Ibn Abil Hadid al-Mu'tazili, he talks about it in quite details. Even the circulars sent by Muawiyah to his governors about fabrication of hadiths. So it was really a very concerted and planned, process during the days of Muawiyah. And basically what he was doing was, number one, he comes to power in the name of Osman, to take revenge against the murder of Osman, since Osman was also from Banu Umayyah. So the first thing he starts is that we would like to see a hadith circulating from the Prophet in praise of the third Khalifa, and an extension in the praise of Banu Umayyah. The second thing, according to the quotations that we have from Ibn Abil Hadid al-Mu'tazili, he says he got the reports that now we have some even companions of the Prophet who are on our payroll and they have done a good job, so he was very satisfied. Now he says the ahadith regarding the third Khalifa and Banu Umayyah have circulated quite a lot. Now go and focus on the ahadith which talks about the merits of the first two Khalifas, basically to promote them. And then the third agenda was basically to counter the ahadith of the Prophet, the genuine ahadith of the Prophet about Ali and his family. And that's where you will see, there are many famous hadiths in connection with this knowledge. The famous hadith where the Prophet says, "Ana madinatul ilm wa aliyun babuha." I am the city of knowledge and Ali is the gate to that city. Now, to counter that, some of these people were bought, and there's to say that yes, and the Prophet said that so-and-so was the wall of that city, and so-and-so was the roof of the city. They didn't realize that the whole purpose of that hadith was symbolic. The Prophet was not talking about a physical city. He's talking about the concept that knowledge is there, and the access to that knowledge is through the gate. Where Ali, in one of his khutbah, he says that I am the gate to the knowledge of the Prophet. Anybody who jumps over the wall is actually a sariq. He is a thief. You have to come through me. And so they, or you look at that other famous hadith where the Prophet says about his grandsons, Al-Hasan wal-Hussein, Sayyid al-Shabab Ahl al-Jannah. They are the youths of the paradise. They couldn't eliminate the hadith, but they just modified it to bring others on that level, that so-and-so are the chief of the elders of paradise. Not knowing that all the believers going into paradise will be raised in their youth age. Even the old will be, youth, the younger one will become youth. And so there will be no elders there to have the chiefs of elders there. And so even those people who basically fabricated these things didn't realize what they are doing. Or maybe this is Allah's way of, saying that you fabricate things, but there will be an internal evidence showing that this is all, fabrication. And people will know that this is not true. So that's one motivation. The second is personal gains. There were people who were close to the rulers, and in order to please them, they would basically make up things for their own personal gain. It's not political or religious issue. The example is of Ghiyas bin Ibrahim al-Nakhai, and he was close to al-Mahdi, the Abbasid third Khalifa actually of the Banu Abbas. And he used to narrate a hadith. He knew that Mahdi Abbasi had one habit or interest, hobby, that would be the right word. His hobby was basically, he was very fond of raising pigeons and making them fly. They would even have competitions of pigeons going from point 1 to B, and they would have competition whose pigeon reaches to the end first. And so this person quoted a hadith in his presence where the Prophet is supposed to have said that there is no competition or betting, if I may use the term here very loosely. Islam has allowed that if there are players, not the spectators, no, the players who are competing against one another on horse riding or camel riding or even archery, they are allowed to actually bet against one another. Not the way people sit down on the bench and look at the horse race and bet against one another. No, the players themselves are allowed to do that. This was just to promote sports, not for the sake of sports, but as a readiness for whenever the time for jihad comes up. And so he added one more. لا سبق إلا في خف أو حافر أو نصل أو جناح. There's no problem in this kind of competition. He added one more. Besides horse riding, camel riding, and archery, the flight of the pigeons. To please Mahdi Abbasi. And Mahdi, he gave him 10,000 dirham as a reward for that. But then he himself says, I know he has lied, but he lied to please me. So this was probably very normal for them, They would just patronize anyone who, basically praises them, even though they know that he's really not very that sincere. He's just doing this to make money. And the third motive for those people who used to fabricate a hadith is really very, I'm surprised. I don't know how even to explain that. It's a religious motive. especially the Sufi people. And there was a time when they used to fabricate ahadith. For example, the name that we have on the slide there, Nuh bin Abi Maryam al-Maruzi. He was very much into quoting Akrimah, who quoted from Ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas said that if you recite this surah, you have this sawab. This surah has this sawab. You know, there's a whole section of hadith literature which is known as Faza'il al-Quran. Means the virtues of reciting the surahs, 1 or 2 or 3 different surahs. And this person, Nuh bin Abi Maryam, used to narrate these kinds of ahadith very frequently, and all different kinds of ahadith about different surahs. So somebody said, you know, you are a student of Ikrimah. How come other colleagues of yours don't remember so many ahadith about this subject the way you quote from Ikrimah, who quotes from Ibn Abbas? You know the answer he gives? He says, إِنَّ النَّاسِ قَدْ أَعْرَضُوا عَنِ الْقُرْآنِ. He says, I looked around and I saw people were turning away from the Quran, ignoring the Quran. وَاشْتَغِلُوا بِفِقْهِ أَبِي حَنِيفَةَ وَمَغَازِ Muhammad bin Ishaq. And they were more busy in studying the book of the fiqh of Abu Hanifa and the history written by Muhammad ibn Ishaq. Therefore, to bring them back to Quran, فَوَضَعْتُ هَذَا الْحَدِيثِ, you know, I fabricated these ahadith about the reward of reciting these surahs in order to incite people to go back to the Quran. So even ahadith are being fabricated apparently for sabilillah, which is really not fi sabilillah. They're going to go to Jahannam, you know, because even to attribute a statement to Rasulullah for whatever motive, you know, as the Prophet says, that you are basically securing a seat for yourself in Jahannam. And so this problem of fabrication is a fact. Nobody can really deny it. Just one very you know, quick survey. If you look at, for example, Sayyid Bukhari. Sayyid Bukhari has 2,761 ahadith, which Imam Bukhari actually selected from the pool of ahadith which consisted of 600,000. And out of this 600,000, he selected only 2,761. It means that even whether it's a Shia Muhaddis or a Sunni, we have our differences on how selection was done, but it shows in both groups. The scholars were very, you know, careful about this issue, that there are many ahadiths which have been fabricated, and so they cannot just take whatever comes in their view. They have to study it, look at the content, look at the sanad, and then only basically accept it or reject it. Let us go to the second of the four narrators that Amirul Momineen talks about. The second is now we're going to the non-hypocrite group, and an individual who was not able to memorize fully. Therefore, he just, you know, not intentionally, but he surmises or just, you know, thinks this is what I heard from the Prophet. And this is basically, we can say, those individuals who were mistaken in narration, not intentionally, you know, attributing things falsely to the Prophet of Islam. And so the way Amirul Momineen describes it, he says, وَرَجُلٌ سَمِعَ مِنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ شَيْئًا لَمْ يَحْفُظُهُ عَلَى وَجْهِهِ. That he basically heard things from the Prophet but did not preserve it the way he should have preserved it in his memory. And so there was change, or, you know, change of even words, but it was not done knowingly. So this is just a genuine mistake by the narrator. As Ali says, you know, he either didn't hear properly or didn't understand, and therefore he surmised what the Prophet had said and believed that this is really what the Prophet had said. And he would go on and quote that, you know, سَمِعْتُ مِنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ, I heard from the Prophet this and that. Now, Amirul Momineen gives them benefit of doubt, and he says that وَلَوْ عَلِمَ الْمُسْلِمُونَ أَنَّهُ وَهِمَ فِيهِ لَمْ يَقْبَلُوهُ مِنْهُ. That if Muslims had known that he has made a mistake in this narration, they would not accept it. Not only them, even he himself, if he had realized that he is making a mistake, he would refrain from using it or even quoting it to others. An example which is interestingly, even the footnotes that we have in the English translation of Nahjul Balagha, we are just being polite in this example. There is a very famous hadith quoted by Sunni sources from Umar ibn Khattab, the second Khalifa, where he says, and actually Sahih Muslim has a whole section. The title is Al-Mayyit yu'adhab bibaka'i ahlihi alayh. That the dead person, the Mayyit, is punished by Allah if its family members cry on it. So when a person dies, you are not supposed to weep or cry or mourn. If you cry, then Allah is going to punish the deceased. Now, even if you just think about it, Allah is just. And if crying is haram, is a sin, the punishment should go to the person who is crying. Not to the dead body. Why would the dead person be punished for something which somebody else is doing? It doesn't make sense at all. And this is a very famous hadith, and at the same time, when people heard this from Umar, they went to Aisha. Said, what is your opinion about it? And she said, he is mistaken. He is mistaken because this goes against the ayat of Quran where Allah says, no soul will be punished for the burden of others. So it was a very good, argument she is bringing, that, it doesn't make sense what he says. Then she says that actually he has mistaken what the Prophet had said. He says, the Prophet once passed by a Jewish woman whose body was being taken, and her people were crying on her. Then the Prophet said that her people are weeping over her, but she is undergoing punishment in the grave. Means after the janazah and everything. And so it's not about Mayyit in general. It was a specific example of, if we may say, a non-Muslim. And so and it doesn't even say anything about the woman being punished because of the weeping or the crying of the family. It's unrelated issue that they are sitting there crying for her, but she, because of her own deeds, is being punished. And so this is where an example can be presented, that this is an example of quoting a statement from Rasulullah without really fully either understanding it or missing the context in which the Prophet uttered those words. Then we go to the third of the four categories that Amirul Momineen has mentioned in this khutbah. And this is basically the category of the people who have fully memorized the hadith. They have not made any mistake in understanding or hearing what the Prophet was saying. But the issue is that they didn't know the full story of that subject. What I mean by that is that Amirul Momineen says, وَرَجُلٌ ثَالِث, the third category is of a person, سَمِعَ مِنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ شَيْئًا يَأْمُرُ بِهِ. It refers to a person who heard the Prophet ordering something to be done. He heard it and he narrated it. There is no problem there. He heard it properly, memorized it properly, narrated it truthfully. But then what happened? He was not there second day or second week or second month when the Prophet reversed his judgment about the same issue. So that fellow only heard one part of it. He didn't hear, so he was not up to date in what the Prophet was saying. And so he, for the whole life, would be quoting the hadith, which is true, but it has become mansukh. He doesn't know about the nasikh. Means he knows the abrogated one, but he doesn't know the hadith which abrogated that. And so it was not done out of, willfully making up things. He is very true in what he's saying, but he is not up to date about that theme. And that is also a problem of some of the hadiths. And so Amirul Momineen uses the word there. He says, he has memorized the hadiths correctly, but his knowledge on that particular subject is not updated. He heard the abrogated hadiths, but didn't hear the abrogating hadiths. And if he had known about it, Ali again gives benefit of now. وَلَوْ عَلِمَ الْمُسْلِمُونَ إِذْ سَمِعُوهُ مِنْهُ أَنَّهُ مَنْسُوخ لَرَفَضُوهُ. If Muslims would have known that the hadith he's quoting is authentic, but this is now abrogated one, they would not have implemented or followed it. The example, again, I'm quoting from this footnotes here from many Sunni sources, including Sahih Muslim, Tirmizi, Abu Dawood, and this is, the example is being used from a Sunni perspective here, where the Prophet said, I had disallowed you to visit the qubur, the graves of the Muslims, but now you can visit. It means that probably there was a time when the Prophet had said, don't go to do the ziyarat of qubur. But then he reversed his opinion on this issue, whatever was the circumstances. Now some people till now, 14th century has passed, still believe, visiting the graves is haram and bid'ah and you get sins. Because they only know one part of the story, not the full story. They did not update themselves on this issue. And so this is where Amirul Momineen is saying that this third category is of a person who is truthful, has fully memorized it, and whatever he's saying is true, but he doesn't know the rest of the story on that theme and that subject. Finally, we come to the last in this category of somebody who has not only fully memorized it, but know the entire background of the theme that this person is talking about. And not many people would be qualified for that group. He says, وَآخَرُ رَابِعُ. The last, fourth one, is the one who does not speak a lie against Allah or against His Prophet. He hates falsehood out of the fear of Allah and respect for the Messenger, and does not surmise, but retains in his mind exactly what he heard from the Prophet. And he relates it as he heard it without adding anything or omitting anything. He heard the repelling tradition, he retained it and acted upon it. And he heard the repealed tradition and rejected it. He also understands the particular and the general, what is am, what is khas. He knows the hadiths which are of allegorical form and the ones which are more decisive. And he gives everything its due position. He knows where to place the ahadith, in which category, in which form. And then Amirul Momineen goes on to say that you have to realize that the sayings of the Prophet are of two kinds. One was particular, the other was general. There are some ahadiths, just like the ayat of Quran, sometimes they are general, sometimes they are very specific, and you have to put the whole, all different aspects together to get the conclusion. Sometimes a man would hear him, but he would not know. Now, besides knowing it, everything, even to understand hadith is an issue. Amirul Momineen says sometimes a man would hear him and retain things properly, but would not know what Allah the Glorified meant by it, or what the Messenger of Allah meant by it. In this way, the listener carries it and memorizes it without knowing its meaning and its real intention, or what was the reason behind it. If you remember, we discussed this khutbah last week, where Amirul Momineen talked about this concept where he says the narrators of knowledge are quite a few, many people, but those who really understand the knowledge are few. And so there is a difference between ruwat and those who are ru'at of ilm. And there are many people who just narrate the hadith, but there are many others who not only narrate but also understand the full impact of the hadith and the words of Rasulullah. And that's where he talks about himself, that not all the Sahaba were of the same level. ليس كل أصحاب رسول الله من كان يسأله ويستفهمه. Not all the companions were of the same level. Not all of them were so comfortable with the Prophet that if they didn't hear, or if they didn't understand something, you know, not everybody would go to the Prophet and says, "Can you explain this to us?" And many times he says, "حتى إذا كانوا ليحبون أن يجيء الأعرابي أو الطارئ فيسأله حتى يسمعوا." Many times these companions of the Prophet would actually be praying that may a Bedouin come from the desert or a traveler come in, and they will ask questions to Rasulullah, and we will get the chance to, you know, get the answer from him. So they would not really ask him directly. They would wait for somebody else to come and you know, ask clarification or the question about issues. And so this is where Amirul Momineen is saying that even those who preserve the ahadith fully does not mean that they understand the impact of the ahadith of the Prophet fully. There are only a few of them. And then he says, of course, he's talking about himself, وَكَانَ لَا يَمُرُّ بِي مِنْ ذَلِكَ شَيْءٍ إِلَّا سَأَلْتُ عَنْهُ وَحَفِظْتُهُ. He says, as far as I'm concerned, whenever I heard anything from him, if things were not very clear, I would be the one to ask him, and he will tell me, and I'll preserve it. And this is how, you know, in this version of the sermon in Nahjul Balagha, Ali ends by saying, فَهَذَهِ وُجُوهُ مَا عَلَيْهِ النَّاسِ مِنْ اخْتِلَافِهِمْ وَعِلَلِهِمْ فِي رِوَايَاتِهِمْ. He says, these are the reasons why there is difference in the ahadith of the prophets. Because of the fabrication, or because of, you know, not hearing completely or preserving it completely, or sometimes not knowing the whole story, and not everybody was on the same level, and that's why you will see the difference in the narrations which have come from the Prophet through the Muslims. But in Usul Kafi, Amirul Momineen talks a little bit more in this khutbah. It's the same khutbah, but he talks about himself more. He says how close he was to the Prophet on this issue. I had the honor to talk with him on whatever subject he was inclined. The companions of the Prophet were, they knew that there was no one other than me who had that proximity or privilege to be close to the Prophet. Many a time I had been at my house, and the Prophet used to come to see me, and this was his usual practice. And he says, I was the person who had admittance to the Prophet at least once every day and once every night, when I used to be alone with the Prophet. Then he says that when he used to come to my house, when I was to enter any of his rooms in the Prophet's house to see him, he used to vacate the room for the sake of privacy with me, and we will discuss issues and knowledge. And even his wives would not be part of that meeting. But when the Prophet, in his turn, used to visit my house for these kinds of gatherings, he would not exclude Fatima and any of my sons from his discussion. On such occasion, he would reply to my queries, and when I had exhausted my queries and remained silent, he himself would initiate further discussions. Never was any case of revelation of any of the verses of the Quran which the Prophet did not recite and dictate to me, and which I did not write down in my own handwriting. Further, never was there any revelation of which the Prophet had appraised me with the basic import, its complete explanation with the verses that were abrogative and the verses that will abrogate it, and the verses which were clear, and the verses which were ambiguous, and even the verses which were of general meaning, and the verses which were of specific meaning. He says, the Prophet once prayed for me that I would never forget anything. And from the day he did that, I started to notice this, and I never ever forgot anything that the Prophet had taught me or dictated to me. And so we see there is a extra, section, especially towards the end of this khutbah, which is there in the narration of Sheikh Kulaini, which is not there in Nahjul Balagha of Sayyid Rizvi. But for us, I think it's obvious. All Muslims around the world believe in this. That the Prophet said, "Ana Madinatul Ilm wa Aliyun Babuha." He is the one. He says, "I am the house of wisdom, and Ali is the door to that house." So this closeness of Ali and the Prophet of Islam, this is beyond any doubt, and we see that Ali is emphasizing on that point here. Let me now I wanted to go to another khutbah, a brief one, but we'll leave it for next week, where he talks about this issue of Saluni qabla an tafqiduni, but inshallah for next week. What I would like to end tonight is the issue of an example of, not just taking so-called ahadith at face value. Many times, we have our own preconceived ideas. Then we see, oh, this is a very interesting hadith. Well, it's interesting because I liked the theme from before. Now I got a, support from an imam. And we have to be very careful about it. One of the famous hadiths, as an example of so-called hadith, is a hadith where this is the hadith which is attributed to Ali, and where we are told that لا تقصروا أولادكم على آدابكم فإنهم مخلوقون لزمان غير زمانكم. Apparently we are told that Ali said, do not compel your children on your manners, on your adab, because they have been created for a time other than your own time. This is a very revolutionary concept, very modern. And people really say, yeah, this is progressive way of looking at things. And we had to realize that, there is always danger, even if you don't look at the sanad of this. You have to be careful that there is a trend these days of saying that even moral values are relative. In a sense, things, when we say it's good or bad, can change with the change of time and place. And that's where this becomes a very dangerous way of looking at the way we have to raise our children. There are some core values which we cannot really ignore, that has to be transferred to the next generation. I don't have a problem with adab. Adab is just mannerism. Mannerism can change from time to time, but akhlaq cannot change. Akhlaq is an absolute matter. These are the values which are there, universal for all times and all places. And this is used by the people who basically believe in this social relativity, that things could be, look at the issue of marriage. They said, oh, well, till about 50 years ago, marriage means men and women marrying. Now things have changed, values have changed. Well, we believe that there are certain things which are universal and absolute, and that cannot change. When we look at this, many scholars I have seen, even some who come here to Bayview, the visiting scholars, they also have recited this. I've seen it in flyers of even Shia conferences. They really like this statement. But I actually, first time when I saw a problem with this was in one of the transcript of this speech of Shaheed Murtaza Mutahiri, where he said, I don't think this is an authentic statement. And well, when the time when Shaheed Murtaza Mutahiri was alive, there were no computer programs of hadith. Alhamdulillah, now we have that advantage. And so when I looked for the source of this, it's interesting that, it's not, it cannot be found in any Shia book of hadith. In Usul Kafi or the other three, there are 4 famous books of hadith of the early days, and 3 other compilations done later on. Even there, this hadith is not there. Not even that, even a book just as Baharul Anwar, 110 or 20 volumes, which has everything in there, because Allah Majlisi wanted to just make sure nothing is lost. He didn't mean that everything is authentic. Even that, Baharul Anwar doesn't have this statement from Ali. This computer program that I searched into, what I saw was a very interesting thing. The first person who attributes this statement to Amirul Momineen is Ibn Abil Hadid al-Mu'tazili, the famous Sunni commentator of Nahjul Balagha. He has a very extensive commentary on Nahjul Balagha in 20 volumes. He lived in the 7th century of the Islamic era. And in the last volume, when he finishes the commentary of the sayings of Imam Ali that Sayyid Razi compiled, then he says the book has come to an end. Then he starts a new chapter. And he says, now I would like to include the sayings of Ali which Sayyid Razi has omitted in Nahjul Balagha. And in writing that, he has come with I don't know how many hundreds sayings of Ali, which are not that in Nahjul Balagha, but he starts that last passage of his last volume with a disclaimer. And the disclaimer is very interesting, where he says, now we are going to describe what Sayyid Razi had not described. فَبَعْضُهُ مَشْهُورٌ عَنْهُ. Some of these sayings that I'm describing here are famous, known to be Imam Ali's statement. بَعْضُهُ لَيْسَ بِذَلِكَ الْمَشْهُورِ. Some of them are not that much famous. وَلَكِنَّهَا قَدْ رَوَى عَنْهُ. They have been narrated from him. وَعُضَى إِلَيْهِ. And they are attributed to him. And then, this is very important. He says, some of these sayings are not from him. وَبَعْضُهُ مِنْ كَلَامِ غَيْرِهِ. Some of these sayings that I have in this last section of my commentary, it is not from him, rather it is from min al-hukama, the philosophers and the wise men. وَلَكِنَّهُ كَالنَّظِيرِ لِكَلَامِهِ. But they are like, similar to his statements, not necessarily his own statements. وَالْمُضَارِعِ لِحِكْمَتِهِ. And they support his wisdom. And therefore, I just included them. And so in that section, he has this hadith, so-called hadith that we just looked at it. And it's interesting that, so the conclusion basically is that, the disclaimer shows that this is not necessarily the hadith from Imam Ali. There is no sanad, so it has no value at all from the hadith point of view. There is no statement from Ali saying that, do not inculcate the values or akhlaq of your generation to the next generation. Actually, I was able to see the source of that statement. It's not from Ali. There is another Sunni book of Shahristani, who lived almost a century before Ibn Hadid al-Mu'tazili, by the name of al-Milal wal-Nahl. There he talks about the philosophers of the ancient times. And he talks about Greek philosophers, 7 of them. One of them was Socrates. And under that section, he says the views of Socrates. And when you see the views of Socrates, there you see exactly the same statement. So that famous so-called hadith is not from Ali. Those are the words of, Socrates. It's not from Amirul Momineen. So keep that in mind, that sometimes, people just say things without really realizing whether this is authentic or reliable or not. We come to the conclusion. Inshallah, we still have about 3 weeks more to go on this series. Any question for tonight? Yes? Are you talking about abrogation in the Quran? Well, yeah. When we talk about nasikh and mansukh, you know, the verses that abrogate and the ones which are abrogated, the examples are very few. If you look at the opinion of Allama Tabatabai as well as Sayyid al-Khuy in his Ulum al-Quran, you know, al-Bayan that he has, basically when they talk about abrogation, the famous verse would be about a woman, for example, who has been, you know, who commits indecency. One of the issues is that, you know, she should be confined to the home. But the ayat itself says until another revelation comes in. So the first order already had a temporary, you know, time limit in it. Yes. But to say that nasikh and mansukh, if there is an ayat which was abrogated, it was abrogated forever. You cannot bring it back now after, you know, 13th centuries or 14th century. So I don't really understand what he means when he's saying it's time bound, because the indication should be in the ayat itself whether this order is time bound or it is universal. Well, that's this, you know, this hadith that we presented is the same problem is there, you see, because then they will say, well, even because the West doesn't agree with the penal code of Islamic laws, there are many Muslims called intellectuals in the West, especially Muslim intellectuals, yeah, who say that, you know, we have to suspend the ayat of Quran dealing with crime and punishment. Whereas there is nothing in Quran which can sustain this kind of attitude. I think what Amirul Momineen was mentioning was not that people completely would not ask questions, but I think it's very common. I think even, you know, when we have things, people would rather prefer, many of the people, a one-to-one discussion about something. They wouldn't want to stand up in public and ask a question, because they feel sometimes, you know, people would ridicule them, that, oh, it's such a simple issue, you are not understanding. And so people have different nature. And this is what Ali is saying. Not everybody was on that level or had that proximity to the Prophet to ask questions or get more elaboration in what he is saying. Where you're referring to? Oh, in Qom. Well, it's. I don't think it's a matter of, you know, people who believe in usuli method, ijtihad method, and akhbari. Is that what you're referring to? Akhbari. Akhbari actually is a. Maybe inshallah, if we get time, we'll talk more about it. Akhbari is basically a school of thought among Shia scholars. Means they have been a very minor segment of Shia scholars in the past, who actually would take all the hadiths in the early 4 books to be equally valid, whereas the usuli group, the mujtahideen that we have, they do not accept that. They say we have to look at a hadith, even if it's in the most important book of Usul Kafi. We can't say that whatever is in there is authentic. We have to look at each hadith individually, look at the Number one, the chain of narration, whether it is sahih or not. So first you go through the chain of narrators. Then even if it is authentic, you look at the content of the hadith. Sometimes, the content itself might say that there is something, missing in it or not right. And so after all that scrutiny, they would accept or reject a hadith. So that's the two views. Of course, the debates have been there all the time. It's not necessarily face-to-face, but it's more through books and lectures. There are some people among the Shias these days, they say, oh, I'm a akhbari, I believe in hadith only. But, they actually do not understand what is even the meaning of akhbari. What does it mean to be an akhbari? Yes. To visit the graveyard, the cemetery, there's no problem. The only issue is that at the time of funeral itself, it is not recommended because of this issue of emotional outburst. But besides that, to go to visit the graves of relatives, there's no problem. It is only at the time of the funeral where it is not recommended. So we'll conclude with dua. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.